Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar here at UK Mediation. So pleased to have you with us today as we talk about preventing homelessness using mediation, and especially thinking about building better bonds with families, looking at all of the aspects of mediation, the aspects of how homelessness can be caused through family breakdown, and what we can do about that as mediators. So great to see so many people on today from the UK and from around the world for this webinar. We usually time this for December when it's pretty chilly outside, a bit of frost and snow on the ground, just to sort of bring home the message about trying to prevent homelessness and people being dispossessed of their houses, so they're sleeping out of doors. So I am Dr. Mike Talbot. I started UK Mediation 23 years ago on the back of a career as a psychotherapist. So I mention that because our angle on these things is very much informed by the psychology of conflict. We're not HR professionals, we're not lawyers. We come at this from the notion of understanding the people who are in conflict as a means to understanding better how we can help resolve that conflict. So this is the organisation's sort of ethos, is psychology of conflict, trying to get underneath the bonnet, understand what's going on in conflict so we can better help to resolve it. So as I come into view, I will tell you about what the webinar today will cover. So overview of what we're going to look at today is the Homelessness Reduction Act, a quick mention about a piece of legislation that's very significant in this field to do with housing people who do find that they have been made or are about to be made homeless. And then thinking about how conflict leads to homelessness. We put a video clip for you at that point, looking at an example of what can happen within families that could potentially lead to a young person being made homeless. Then thinking about where mediation fits in. How can we slot mediation in at the right time and in the right way so that we are resolving that conflict which would otherwise lead to people leaving a family home. A bit of a mention about how mediation works, and then some time at the end for Q&A, but you'll notice there's the chat box on your screen where if you're watching live, you're very welcome to pop your questions or comments in there, and I'll try and deal with them as I go along. If you prefer to send a question by email, you're welcome to do that either during or after the webinar, and we'll try and get around to those as well. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes and we'll see how we go. So first of all, in time-honoured fashion, we've got some statistics. Some fairly scary statistics, I might say. So big issue, very latest figures from them is that there's about 227,000 homeless people in the UK. They say a minimum estimate because anybody who's working in this field, and I see we have some friends on the webinar today who do work in this field, you'll know even better than I do that this is a massive underreporting. So the way the stats are collected, the way the figures are recorded, and the lack of frequency of taking these figures means that that's probably a lot more. A minimum of 227,000 homeless people in the UK, which is a shocker. 120,000 of those are under the age of 16. These are right up-to-date figures from Action for Children. So that many kids without a home as we speak today, December 22. And people in temporary accommodation on top is 120,000 of those. So temporary accommodation might be B&Bs, might be hosted in host homes or in hostels, particularly hostels and night shelters as well. So temporary accommodation. And we have an additional figure as well to talk about this year and last actually, is around the number of Ukrainian refugee households. So as we are at the point now of the end of the 6 months of refugee families and individuals coming into UK households, what we've got now is an uptick in the numbers of people declaring themselves to be homeless because of these arrangements coming to an end. And I'll say a little bit more about what's been going on within some of the households who are hosting refugees, Ukrainian refugees, but there's an additional number now, number of households who are at risk of homelessness at the moment, and it is very much the risk of homelessness which is addressed within the Homelessness Reduction Act. So I'll just say a quick word about that as well. This is a piece of legislation from 2017, and it was intended to bind local housing authorities to taking greater notice of the threat of homelessness. So there's this period defined of 56 days so that people who are threatened with homelessness can apply to a housing authority to anticipate that they may be about to become homeless and then the Homelessness Reduction Act requires that the Housing Authority puts a personalised housing plan in place. So we're trying to be a bit more proactive about assessing and providing PHP's personal housing plans for people when they announce that they may be about to become homeless. So this is a big change. I think we're just monitoring, housing authorities are monitoring how much difference this is making. But the overall intention, of course, was to ensure that there are fewer people presenting with the situation of having become homeless, pitching up at the housing authority with everything in a black plastic bag saying it's happened. So trying to anticipate that very unfortunate situation. So the quote from the Act is about relief. It's taking reasonable steps to make sure the applicant can secure suitable accommodation. So that includes mentioning in the Act of attempting mediation or conciliation where somebody's threatened with exclusion by the family or by a parent. So what we're talking about is mediating within families and households where there's a chance that somebody might be about to be made homeless and trying to resolve that conflict. So all applies to everybody who is or is about to. There's no exclusions. There used to be exclusions in law with certain groups of people who are homeless, but now it applies to everybody. And in particular, what the Act requires is a thorough assessment and a personalised response, not a one-size-fits-all. So it's about having a personalised housing plan, places much more emphasis on preventing it and aims to help all of those people who are homeless and eligible, and scratching out all of the previous exclusion criteria. Okay. There is a requirement, however, for the applicant to cooperate with the housing authority. This is something else that the Act intended to address, is where people in the past hadn't cooperated with the attempts of the housing authority. They're now required to do so and to work with the housing authority to try and basically get that person off the streets. So of particular interest to us, of course, UK Mediation is about conflict leading to homelessness. And I've got quite a bit to say about that, but just first of all, a vivid illustration of the kind of thing that can happen within a household is in the piece of video we're just about to show you. So we have a situation with a mum, Sally, and the daughter, Molly, where there's conflict between the two, and it is of a degree where the young person, Molly in this case, is threatened with homelessness, potentially a case that could benefit from mediation. And I'll talk about how we would apply mediation to a situation like this after we view the video.
17-year-old Molly lives at home with her mum Sally and younger sister Ellie. Molly attends a college course and Sally has a part-time job. Relations between Molly and Sally have been difficult over recent months. Sally says Molly has become evasive and less communicative, and Sally has become impatient with Molly over this. Sally is also concerned that Molly is no longer prepared to contribute by helping out around the house. Molly is at a point of wanting to assert her independence more, and she gets irritable around Sally if she asks her too many questions or wants to know who she is with or where she is going. She also resents Sally asking her to do chores. A new week is just beginning, and Molly and Sally meet in the kitchen at breakfast time.
Oh, did you sleep well? In college this morning?
Yeah.
What time are you going in?
9.
How are you getting on with that piece of portfolio evidence? Are you struggling with that a bit?
Fine.
What time are you back?
Normal time.
Aren't you eating breakfast with me?
No.
Molly, bring your bowl down when you finish with it. I'm sick of all that stuff being in your bedroom. Hello. Oh, yes, it is. It's Sally. Molly's mum, yes. Oh, hello. It's nice to talk to you. Molly's not been attending college. No, I had no idea. She's not attended for 3 weeks. She's been packing her bags and saying each morning, I'm going off to college. And she sort of, well, in amongst everything, she sort of vaguely said what she's been doing. Right. Yeah. I've noticed a change in her attitude. Yeah, definitely. She's been quite rude and difficult. Yeah. I've had a sense that she's not always telling the truth, and she's been a bit evasive. Yeah, she's blocked me on Facebook, so I have a sense that she was beginning to hide things. But you know, part of that I thought was just growing up a bit. Well, yeah, I'll wait until she comes in later, and then I'll have a word with her. Okay, I'll ring you. Have you got a phone number? I can get you on the phone, the number you've just rung me on. Okay, so if I give you a ring back as soon as I've spoken to her, and we can decide what to do and what's been happening. Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I do really appreciate it. I'm really, really sorry. I wouldn't have been letting it happen if I'd have realised. Okay, all right, thank you. Bye-bye. Molly, where have you been? You've been missing for 2 days.
Been with friends.
I've rang all your friends.
Well, I've been with friends. Why does it
ones?
matter? Just friends.
I've been worried about you.
It's just with friends.
And college is just wrong.
Oh,
What's
fuck
going
off!
on?
Why
Molly,
does
this
it
conversation's
matter?
not over. What's going on with your attitude?
Nothing.
It's terrible at the moment. Ellie shouldn't have to hear that sort of language from your mouth. She's only next door. Don't look at me like that. What's going on with college?
Nothing.
The phone said you're not even coming to lectures. Your attitude's terrible. The room looks like a complete pigsty.
Oh, just leave
Where
me
are you
alone.
going?
I'm staying
Where are you
with
going?
friends.
Hello, Mum. You all right?
Yeah.
Nice evening last night.
Yeah.
About today. Where have you been today?
Just out.
Seen Holly or Sophie?
No.
Texted them last night because you haven't come in.
Why have you been texting my friends?
Because you're 17. You stormed out
Yeah,
last
but
night and I didn't know where
That
you
doesn't
were.
give you the right to text my friends.
Of course it does, I'm your
No,
mum.
it doesn't.
does. They didn't know where you were either.
Yeah, why do they need to know?
Because I want to know where you are and what you're doing. Anything could happen to you. It matters. Put your phone down. What's going on with you?
Nothing.
I'm fed up with this, Molly. You live in this house. I pay for the phone that you spend your life on. You don't do anything around the house. You don't help out.
Yeah, but that's because you're my mum.
It doesn't mean you can then treat
Yeah, but you're
me
still-
and your
you're
little
still my
sister
mum.
so badly. Me, you and Ellie are a unit. Your dad went. So
Yeah,
that's just you.
no, your dad left because you were controlling him and you're doing exactly the
Oh
same
no,
thing
he
to
left
me.
to be with somebody else, and he doesn't even want to see us.
No, he left because you were controlling him and you're doing the same thing to me.
Oh, it's a shitty thing to say, Molly.
Nothing.
Your attitude's terrible at the moment. What's going on with you?
Nothing.
You're lying all the time. You're deceitful. I don't know where you are, what you're doing. Your
Why
friends
do you
don't
need
know
to
where
know?
you are.
Why do they
we
need to
care
know?
about you. You've even taken us off Facebook. Why's that?
It's my life.
Is it? You were supposed to get your sister last week. You never picked her
That's
up.
not my job. Keep
Yes,
your
it
nose
is.
out of my
Yes, it
life.
is. I've asked you to do something. You live in this house. You ought to help me out with
stay
things.
then.
What? Why are you still on your phone? What is it?
Not.
Give it here. What are you hiding?
Nothing.
What is it, Molly?
Fine then. That.
Well,
Steve.
who's he?
That's who I've been seeing.
He's old enough to be your dad.
No, he's not. I can do what I want. I can see what I want.
Is that who you've been staying with?
Yes.
Has he been encouraging you
No,
not to attend
why
college?
do you care?
Well, I'm your mum.
Yeah, well, I'll leave then.
Well, do.
Well, fine.
Why
Just
don't you
get out.
You'll be better with you out here. Hello, Sophie. What can I do for you? Right. She's been on your sofa. For how many days? What's happened? I thought she was with this Steve. Right. So she's not telling you much about it? Well, thank you for calling me and letting me know. Is she there now? I can talk to her. All right, you don't know where she is? Oh, I see you going away. I hope she hasn't gone back to him. Well, thank you for letting me know. I do really appreciate it. Okay. All right. Bye, Sophie. Hello? Yeah. Sorry? You're a homeless charity? Oh, you've got Molly with you? Oh, thank goodness for that. Is she all right? Okay, why is she with you? Yeah, I knew what was happening to her a couple of days ago because her friend Sophie has spoken to me to say that she'd been on a sofa, but then she was going on holiday. And then we'd got no idea where Molly had gone, and she was not answering any phone calls or texts. Well, yeah, she might have said that I didn't want her back, but we're in the full flow in a argument. She's been very, very difficult. She hasn't been going to college, and as we thought, she'd moved in with this older man. And she wasn't listening to me. She wouldn't have anything to do with me, or her friends for that matter. Yeah. Mediation. What is it? Right. So I'd come in and have and talk to her. Oh, but I've talked to her loads. It's making absolutely no difference. She's not listening to me, and we just end up arguing, and it just gets out of hand, and it just gets even worse. Right, okay. I can't come in today. I've got to collect her sister from school. I could come tomorrow after I've dropped her daughter off. Okay, if you text me where you are, and I'll come in as soon as I've dropped her off. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
So there we have quite a vivid illustration of the kind of conflict that can arise between a parent and a youngster there. So some issues to do with boundaries in the house leading to an escalating conflict quite quickly over the course of days. Things break down between the two, and there's a good chance there that Molly is going to find herself out of a permanent home. So let's just have a sort of zoom in on some of those issues there, the kinds of stuff that can happen within families. It might be around conflict actually between, or abuse between the parents and carers. So it's about what's being enacted between the couple of parents or carers. It may be there might be disagreement with the youngster about where boundaries lie, which is what we're seeing there with Sally and Molly, about times that you keep, who you see, lifestyle habits, whether you're attending education or work, how you conduct yourself around the home, keeping in touch, communication, etc. Could be to do with, quite often, which is a thing that comes up in the Sally-Molly drama, is about the parent carer doesn't know what the young person is up to or where they are, and sometimes the parent carer doesn't care about what the young person is up to or where they are. So it might be about a lack of regard between the parent and young person, or it might be simply that they're not communicating, so the parent carer doesn't know where the young person is, which, as any parent carer would know, produces a lot of anxiety when we're talking about youngsters. So it's about boundaries, it's about what's going on between the couple, it's about whether you know what the young person's up to or care. And it might be also the predicament that the parent and carer is in. Maybe their mental health that's affecting the young person, or there may be issues to do with misuse of drugs and alcohol in the household that is directly affecting the young person. So in many cases, it's about the young person choosing to leave. In some cases, it's about the parent and carer requiring the young person to leave. And there's been some debate in the field about the use of this term homelessness mediation, or trying to prevent homelessness or prevent the youngster from leaving the parental home or the carer's home. Actually, the best thing for the young person is sometimes to leave that home. From an abusing environment, or an environment in which that person's going to come to harm, actually they're better off out of it. So sometimes that might be the conclusion of mediation. So I know there's tends to be where it's funded mediation, it's like ticking the box to say, yes, the young person's staying in the house. Actually, it's sometimes a better outcome that the young person doesn't stay in the house. So that's the Molly and Sally situation, and you can imagine similar analogous situations all across the country. Judging by the figures that I mentioned earlier, there's quite a lot of that does go on. But of course, now there's an additional factor in the mix, which is to do with Ukrainian refugees, and I just wanted to mention about that. Just to remind you, it's 800 Ukrainian households who are currently at risk of homelessness after the hosting period comes to an end. And I'm sure you're aware the government provided 6 months worth of funding, which is looking like it's being extended to a point now, actually. Just news this week, actually extending the bursary, the allowance that's been paid for the hosting family who have taken in Ukrainian refugees. But where there is at the end of that 6 month period, where the Ukrainian family or individuals are leaving the house now, a lot of people are presenting as homeless. So what's happened is that there has been significant conflict in some of the households, not surprisingly, with the hosts, which has led either to an early rematching and in some cases a failure to find a replacement host. So those individuals who've come from war-torn Ukraine to the UK have ended up having significant conflict in the household where they have placed or been placed. And the result of that is that we are working with several organisations and charities and local authorities who are exploring mediation services or mediation training in many cases, so that they can work with resolving the conflict between the guests and the hosts in those hosting families. So it's an interesting one, and as I speak today, as one of our team is out training an organisation that deals with Ukrainian refugees in the UK, where we have some English speakers and some Ukrainian speakers. So they're both doing the mediation and some interpretation as well. So they are going to be trained to go into these households, mediate between host and guest, try and resolve conflict, think about putting boundaries down, etc. If you want to read more into that, there is an article on our LinkedIn that I just wrote last week, going into a bit more detail about the kinds of issues that come up and the kinds of things that can be anticipated coming up between the host and the guest, which if we're aware of those and get onto them at an early stage, we can probably head off or preclude any conflict which might further down the road require mediation. So my colleagues just popped up in the chat box there about the article that I'm referring to, so you can click through there after the webinar and read more about that. So what does happen within these families tends to be a very quick summary of the article there is about mismatch expectations between what the guest expects and what the host expects. Things to do with children's issues, which as we know are particularly contentious when these things come to the surface. Simple things about eating habits, contributing to the house, whether the guests and hosts spend time together, and basic house rules. So if these things can be anticipated, we reckon you can head off about 90% of the kinds of conflict situations that we've come across or heard about with people that we're working with at the moment, to actually get these boundaries set from the outset, so people understand from the refugees' point of view what they're letting themselves in for, and from the host's point of view what they're letting themselves in for, and just make sure that we get some kind of a deal up front about these things, and that's mutually understood and that can head off the conflict in the first place. But when the mediators go in, quite often they will be talking about the very things that are on the screen now. But where does the mediation come in, both with the refugee situation and in more general situations like the Molly, Sally type situation? What are we talking about in terms of mediation in there? Well, what essentially we're talking about is we're setting up an environment with the mediation for people to come up with their own workable, pragmatic solutions for things like how somebody integrates with the family home, which might be the Molly or it might be a Ukrainian refugee. Or if they're going to be leaving the family home or the host family, how they move on with dignity and get themselves into an alternative setting. So, as I say, quite often the mediation outcome is a good outcome, but it means that the person leaves the home, be it a refugee or be it a Molly type situation. But to do that with dignity, with planning, without it being an emergency chuck out situation, to go to an alternative setting where they're safe and they're secure and they're supported. So that's sort of, very loosely speaking, the aims of the mediation, is setting up an environment for the right kind of conversations to happen so that this output can be achieved. So this usually gets provided through an agency. The mediation is provided through an agency that the refugee or the young person might come into contact with. Charities that we've worked with include these guys on screen, fantastic organisations, DePaul and St Basil's and Night Stop, and many more as well besides Bernardo's. We could list a lot more. And then the refugee representative agencies such as the Association for Ukrainians in GB and the British Ukrainian Society, who we're working with as well. So in terms of other bodies that might offer the mediation or how it's provided, it might be done through local authorities, which can include family group conferencing. And I see we've got a few people on from that kind of background, which for those of you who don't know is, as the name suggests, it's about looking at the wider family group, having a conference which is facilitated by somebody impartial using mediation skills to actually help the family between them. It might include aunties and uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, who contribute to a plan for that young person so they don't end up on the streets. It might include sofa surfing, putting them up temporarily, having a refuge, somebody paying for some phone credit, whatever it is, the wider family getting together to conference about how to ensure that that young person is in somewhere that's safe and secure and supported. And the other provision can come through community mediation providers. That tends to be where it comes from. So we're going to move into thinking about how mediation works. So we can see the problem, we see the size of the problem, we can see what happens, vividly illustrated on the clip there, and I've talked about how this relates as well to refugee situations. So here's where we move into thinking about what mediation actually does. Well, key building blocks of mediation is that it's voluntary. You can't force people to take part. We would always encourage people into mediation, but you can't force people into it. So you have to have this buy-in so that people are prepared to talk and listen and negotiate and get to the point of hopefully reaching a deal between the young person and the parent or carer, so that they come up with the answer. If they come up with the answer and the deal and the boundaries and the agreement, then they're going to make it work. If it feels like it's imposed on them, it ain't going to work. I can promise you, it will not happen. The practitioner, the mediator or facilitator, needs to be thoroughly impartial. So it's not about blaming or finger wagging, particularly where there's children's issues involved. We may have views about you should do this, you ought not do that, you shouldn't do this. We have to turn that off as mediators. So we're impartial, we treat both parties equally. We're not looking at the quality of people's parenting or the standards of a young person's conduct, or a refugee's conduct. Not our business. We're there to help in an impartial way with people who've voluntarily walked forwards to the mediation arena, if you like. And our job there is to set up the right conditions for a good conversation to happen and to help people speak openly and honestly. And the way that we get people to invite people to speak openly and honestly is by setting up a confidential environment where people get to say what they like. So where there's young people involved, of course, we have to be mindful of safeguarding issues. So any 16s or under, we've got to just be a bit aware, or any people in positions of authority. We've got to be careful about making sure that the young person's safety is given primacy. And then, we've got to be careful about disclosures, non-disclosures. However, ultimately, the environment is confidential, so people can say what they like to us, subject to that proviso. Okay, so they're the three building blocks of mediation, and then we have a staged model of mediation. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. You can find on our website webinars that go into more of an exposition of the model, but I will say very briefly what we do is we meet privately with the two parties. So allowing people to offload and making sure that we've got their buy-in to the mediation process, and we do that equally with the two parties. So we're meeting separately and privately with the parent carer and either the guest refugee or the young person, as in cases like Sally and Molly. Meeting them both separately, privately, not retaining any notes, not passing things on between the two in that confidential initial meeting. We stop and then we have a think at stage 3 and decide whether A, it's appropriate to bring people together face to face. It sometimes isn't. We might do it in a shuttle mediation where we have people separately, or if we have to, we might do it online. And of course, in the refugee situation, it's about using, in some cases, an interpreter as well. We think about who should be the mediator and a few considerations to plan for the stage 4, which is about bringing people together in a joint mediation session, which may be online again, or preferably face-to-face. We much prefer face-to-face. Sometimes it might be a shuttle mediation, so they're actually in the same building at the same time, but we shuttle between the two, see one, see the other, see one, see the other. So we run through the face-to-face session here, talking about some rules and making sure there is some understanding about proper conduct within the mediation. We're not having a free-for-all. But within that, we try and get to the point of an agenda at the end of 4, and then we move into the negotiation phase at stage 5. So this is the substantive part of the mediation. It's about looking at where we start with usually what can be a list of 4 or 5 key issues that need to be negotiated between the two parties, and then looking at reframing away from blame and fault into a situation where people share responsibility for making a situation better, and where we think more about the future than the past. There can quite often, in many conflicts, including these kinds of conflicts, be it's your fault, no, it's your fault, well, you did this, well, you said that. They're not going to agree about the history in the past. What we are about as mediators is thinking of finding the areas of consensus, raising people's commitment to share the responsibility to make the situation better, sometimes speaking to them separately, but ultimately getting them to the point where we build an agreement between them. So building some kind of a future-focused agreement that's been reached fairly, that's theirs, not ours, and that they feel bought into, that they have made, that they are both in agreement about every word on that particular agreement and output from the mediation. Sometimes other people need to see the agreement. That's down to the parties to decide if that's the case. So we put that in place. Hopefully they go away and start to conduct themselves differently on the basis of that agreement, and we will usually follow up afterwards to see if it's worked. Just in case we got ourselves a non-stick agreement that doesn't last more than a few days, we check back in a few weeks and see how they've got on and whether any further support is needed. And in a lot of family settings, family situations, it is appropriate to go back for repeated sessions, or even just to recognise from the outset that what we need is a couple of hours every fortnight, or an hour every Friday afternoon or something, more than an intense day. It can be that this is spaced out over a long period, but the same principles apply. It has to be voluntary, it has to be private, the practitioner has to be impartial, and anything that's agreed comes from the parties, not from the practitioner. Why does it work? Well, it certainly does work, and we can say that one of the things that helps it to work is that both sides get to hear how the other has been impacted. So both the parent, carer, host get to hear how they have been impacted by what's going wrong with the visitors or residents in their house, and the young person or refugee gets to hear all about that. So it's about understanding how your own words and actions have impacted on the other person, and doing that 2 ways. Also, you get a chance to explain your motivations to the other, why I behave in this way, or why I need this to be the case, or why I said that or did this. So actually helping both sides to understand the other one's motivations is a key element in why the mediation works, as well as hearing this impact and building a small amount of empathy between the parties. So a small amount of being able to see the situation from the other person's perspective. We also get a good deal of offloading or catharsis in this process where the unsayable gets said. So there might have been things that have not yet been said, but in this safe and private environment that we try to set up, hopefully people will say things that they wouldn't otherwise be saying to each other. And ultimately what we get is a greater sense of collaboration between the two and then making a future focused plan. So it's not just about the agreement, and I find we and my panel are saying this quite a lot. It's not just about getting some words on a page. It's about building the understanding between the parties, and it's about the process, the interpersonal process they go through on the mediation day, where they get to offload and to hear from the other party, and they get to tell the other party about the impact of the other's words and behaviours on the first person. Okay, so it's very important to recognise that it's not just getting to the point of writing some stuff down, it's actually how that interaction goes and the experience of having possibly the best conversation that they've ever had. How do we make the most of it? Well, in terms of our recommendation always is to get mediation in early on. As soon as things start to go wrong, you need to make sure that we're getting mediation in very early. Don't leave it until communication is completely broken down. So that's the first one really. Top tips is getting mediation in early on. Second one, it's got to be voluntary and seen to be voluntary. So we can't pretend that voluntary is voluntary. We really have to recognise that people will resist being made to do something against their will. So if they feel that somebody's pulled in there and say, right, you've got to do this and you've got to do that, it's not going to happen. They will resist it. And I know that feeling. I've been told you've got to do something and pushing back on it. So you have to be encouraged to buy into this, but we can't be forced into it. We can't be made to participate. So voluntary must mean voluntary. And also impartial must mean impartial. So if that practitioner, mediator, facilitator, in any way demonstrates or even suggests that what they're doing is taking sides or falling down on the side of the young person or refugee or the parent carer, then you're going to get a lot of resistance, okay? So we want to make sure that we are impartial and that we communicate that to the parties, that we are impartial. They don't want you to judge or take, well, they actually quite often want you to judge, but in their favour, and they want you to take their side. But we want to make sure that we are equally invested in both sides' interests. We equally advocate for the two sides in the pursuit of having a great conversation where we remain and really reinforce that impartiality throughout. So we equally support the two parties to share the responsibility for making the situation better. Okay, so that's how we make the most of mediation. So into now, just to see if there's any questions or comments really before I wrap up for today. And it's always interesting to know what people's thoughts or questions or ideas are around this particular topic. So let's move into the any questions bit and see if anybody's got anything they'd like me to address. So we do have a question from David. Thank you very much, David. How do you manage expectations for the mediation? Surely the parents are aiming to keep the young person at home, even if that's not the best option. Okay, well, it's a great question, David. How we manage the expectation is in introducing mediation, we say anything's possible. So we need to support both parties equally to say it may be that there's a decision made around how the young person will stay or about how they will leave, but we need to know that the young person is supported and safe and secure in whatever arrangement is made. People will usually have an expectation from the outset. Perhaps the young person expects they're going to stay, whereas the parent carer expects that they're probably going to move on. If the parents are separated or carers are separated, and maybe there's some arrangement that involves both of them, both the parents, maybe they both need to be involved in the mediation. But we would say we're not going to impose any outcome, and the only time that we would put any sort of boundaries or limits down is when we feel that anybody is at risk of coming to harm. Otherwise, it may be that, it was definitely the case that we would set the expectation by saying anything's possible. Great question. Karis, you've got a question as well. Do you need a specific type of training or qualification for this type of mediation, or is it more to do with having a relevant background? I think it's fair to say, Karis, that it would help to have a relevant background, but yes, indeed, you do need a specific training for this. So where we train people on our larger accredited training courses, quite often the first few days of a 5-day course, we're changing people's minds, particularly away from solution giving and problem solving and directing people into particular actions. So a lot of agencies where people come to us from, that would be what they do, and fair play to them. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Quite often it is appropriate to be arbitrating these disputes, telling people what should happen, applying some expertise, bringing down aspects of the law or Children's Act, applying aspects of the Homelessness Reduction Act, etc., etc. Absolutely appropriate. But what we find in the training is quite often training people to be impartial, training people to have that hands-off approach where you get the conversation going, but you're not part of the conversation. So yes, there is a specific training. I won't do a sales thing here. There's a link popped up in the chat box. If you want to look at training options, you go there. I won't start to bang that drum just here right now. Okay, great. Thank you for your questions. If you have any further questions or think of anything after the webinar, you're very welcome to chip in, and we'll do our best to answer them. So before I close for today, hopefully within my 45 minutes, that would be great, wouldn't it, if I could do it once. Just a quick mention about upcoming webinars. So we do these webinars more or less monthly, usually Friday lunchtimes, Friday at 12 o'clock. Just a couple around the corner, very much in the news at the moment. We try and hit the zeitgeist, as it were, talking about trade unions and conflict resolution. So some stuff to do with either working with trade union members, resolving conflicts between sometimes members and non-members, or a member and a member, in order to, or negotiating salary disputes, or in some ways avoiding industrial action. So definitely all over the news today, to do with the train strikes at Christmas, to do with the nurses' strike, up the nurses, and to do with the various industrial action that's going on over the festive season. But we'll be talking about that one in January. Perhaps things would have moved on by then. Also thinking of our February webinar, we have one around workplace wellbeing. So there's a really close tie-up, and again, it's a couple of projects we've got on the go at the moment, looking at mental health and conflict, how mental health issues can impact on people's interactions to the point where they find themselves in conflict, or how conflict can bring about mental health problems as well. So thinking about workplace wellbeing, particularly around interpersonal conflict that may lead to stress and sickness and absenteeism. So we have a webinar on that on February, and then the other one we'll talk about, if all of this has whetted your appetite for becoming a mediator, if you're not already, launching your mediation career. So March, we'll be looking at how you can become a professional mediator, from making your decision to do so, thinking about a niche for your practice, and then getting crucial experience after your qualification. Okay, so there's 3 of our webinars, January, February, March next year. It'd be great if you could join us again for another webinar at that time. It's all in the chat box there. There's links for signing up for the webinars. There's links for our course. There's links to that article I mentioned about Ukrainian refugees in Britain. And you can see more of the videos on a particular, on a particular webinar. There we go. Molly and Sally. You can click on there and see a bit more of those video clips if you wish. I'm sure you do. Okay, nice to have you join us today for our Friday webinar about preventing homelessness. Be great to have you keep in touch with us. The usual channels, like and subscribe with YouTube, follow us on Twitter, connect with us on LinkedIn, both UK Mediation and EU Mediation now. Pleased to say we have our foothold in the EU now, based in Ireland, so EU Mediation's all a go. And you can also like our Facebook page, find lots of stuff on all of these channels. Very welcome to visit, have a go, interact with us. Be great to have you keep in touch with us. For today, I will say thanks for watching. Have a super break. Have a great new year. It was at the end of our webinar today, and we'll see you again soon.